this could cause a massive amount of consumer price inflation in 2024, and nobody's really talking about it. It's the Panama Canal crisis, and it is literally another global trade bottleneck that has the ability to cause consumer price inflation or even deflation. So we'll get into that and more. So let's dig into what exactly is going on. Panama Canal drought hits new crisis level with nearly half of vessel traffic targeted for cut. Now, not only is this going on, you're also having widespread protests across the country over the Cobra mine project approval. Basically, that was actually for a Canadian miner, First Quantum. First Quantum stock has absolutely collapsed since the massive amount of civil unrest actually ensued. And basically, the Panama government has failed to get this civil unrest under control. And really, actually, it shows you how when everybody stands united, there is nothing that the government can do to stop it. But anyway, this is obviously having massive impacts, and it's now even affecting the Panama Canal. And I'm going to show you this video, and thank you for Chris. Chris is boots on the ground there in Panama and sent me this video and another video of what's going on. He actually got caught in a roadblock, one of these protests. But essentially, this video shows the vessels going out there to try and intercept boats in the canal. So let's get right into it. See them heading out with the flags. So obviously this is causing widespread civil unrest across Panama. It's not really good. You've got this affecting the Panama Canal, which is a massive, massive place where global trade filters through that canal essentially. And this has the ability to cause a similar crisis and bottleneck to what we saw with the ports in LA and Vancouver back in 2021. And actually, you can even go back to a story that was in 2020, and literally it talks about how the Panama Canal traffic jam is affecting ocean shipping. And obviously this was right before the massive amounts of consumer price inflation that we saw in 2021. Now, I'm not saying that this is the only cause of that inflation. Obviously there was a variety of factors, but the reason I'm bringing this to your attention is because with a potential election possible in Canada and the United States, you are guaranteed going to have governments that are promising more stimulus, whether it's conservative, Republican, I don't care. They're going to come out, they're going to try and promise more stimulus packages to help with this inflation. If the government's response is that, obviously that could cause consumer price inflation to absolutely soar again because everybody gets online, starts ordering stuff again. You've had a massive manufacturing slowdown in both Canada and the US. So this is the United States Performing Manufacturing Index, and you can see that has dropped substantially. And then if you look at Canada, it's even more bleak for Canada's PMI. You can see that has dropped off massively. So manufacturing in the United States and Canada has dropped off because of the recession. And right now, obviously, we're in this global recession. We're heading into a global depression possibly. And next year is going to be very interesting. It's almost impossible to predict what is going to happen next year, because if there isn't stimulus, this could actually cause a deflationary impact for the global economy. And let me explain why that actually might be the case. But first of all, I just want to take you over to this shipping map just to give you an idea of just how many ships are sat out there literally waiting to get through the Panama Canal. All these are container ships. Remember when you had loads and loads of ships off the port of LA essentially that couldn't get through? Well, you've got the same thing happening in Panama right now. And obviously the Northwest Passage, which is being used more frequently in the summer, is more difficult to use in the winter. And at many times you cannot use it, especially if you're not in an icebreaker ship. So anyway, and now I want to show you this because this is important as well, so you can understand how this could have a deflationary impact. So Panama Canal auction smashes vessel transit record as slot goes for 2.85 million. Fernley Securities reported that on Monday, bidding for a crossing was concluded at a whopping 2.85 million. This compares with a normal booking fee of $900,000 and beats from the previous highest price of 2.6 million billion from November last year. So obviously you can see that this has the ability to cause deflation. How so? Well, think about it, because essentially if shipping companies are having to pay more money to bid up these auctions to essentially get their ships through the canal, what happens is that pressure goes on to the businesses. And if the businesses in Canada and the United States can't pass that on to the consumer, then guess what? They've got to take that cost on, and they're more likely to lay off workers, which then filters through to the economy and actually has a deflationary effect. It's kind of like the effects of higher oil prices on the economy have a deflationary pressure, actually. Most people associate high oil prices with inflation, but if you actually think about it, because people need it, they are spending more on oil and they're not spending on all these other goods and services, and that has a deflationary impact on the economy. So the same goes for something like this. So if there's stimulus out there in 2024, that could have the ability to send inflation way up, because you have the breakdown of yet another supply chain in Panama because of the drought, which doesn't seem like it's going to be abating anytime soon. The drought is really a big crisis. And let me just talk about this for a second and you'll kind of get an understanding. According to Panama Canal authorities, the drought requires them to reduce the number of daily transits from 29 to 25 ships. And in the preceding weeks, they will reduce vessel transits even more until it declines to 18 ships a day in February. That represents between 40 to 50% of full capacity. Under normal conditions, between 34 and 36 vessels traverse the canal daily. The drought and vessel reductions are having a major impact on the flow of trade, according to data from the CNBC supply chain providers. But you're not really hearing this talked about in the financial media at all. It's kind of bizarre, actually, how this isn't getting a wider coverage, considering what a massive impact this has. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how this video does. I'm expecting that not that many people are going to watch this video, which will be the case of why they're not covering it. But I don't produce videos just for views. That's not why I'm here doing this. I produce videos to help educate people and prepare for the future. And this is exactly what we're doing right now with this video. So it's going to be interesting to see how this video does. It's kind of a bellwether for why the media isn't actually covering it. If the video doesn't do well, then it's probably because people aren't bothered about that. They're more bothered about elections. They're more bothered about what's going on in their own country, politically, financially, housing markets, etc. This obviously cannot be solved very quickly. Researching what they're doing to address the drought right now. There's a proposed pipeline that they could put in, but that could take years to get completed. And the El Nino weather pattern is going to affect it, making the drought even worse. Lake Gatun that fills the canals, essentially, because the ships have to actually go up because there's a mountain range there. Essentially, what happens when they open the locks up, they're losing lots of water to the ocean every single year. Now, normally that gets replenished by rains, but they didn't have many rains apparently over this year, even though when I was there, we went through so many storms, but they're just not getting them in that particular area of the country where Lake Gatun is. And because of the canal, that kind of creates its own microclimate for the area of Panama City and the surrounding areas there. So it's always kind of weird because Panama City is often in the sunshine, whereas in the rainy season, the rest of the country is in cloud and there's thunderstorms, etc. So regardless of what's affecting it, you've also got these protests that have erupted across Panama. So a copper mine that is First Quantum, actually a Canadian company, essentially agreed, and it was signed into law with the government, this new mining contract, which was meant to be for 20 years, I believe. And since then, there has just been massive uproar and civil unrest and social unrest against this. You know, they're blocking streets. The whole country is ground to a halt. And they're all standing united because they don't want this mine to go ahead. Last year, you had protests over high fuel prices that happened in Panama, which led the government to come in and then start subsidizing fuel prices. Obviously, the problem is for the Panamanian government, big sources of their revenue are under threat right now. One, the canal, and two, the mine. And they are spending at a deficit. And because they are a dollarized economy, and I think this is really interesting for people to understand, because they are a dollarized economy, they cannot just print dollars like Canada can. They don't have a central bank that can just print dollars, so they can't do that. So they rely on external creditors, and obviously for more developing nations, the interest rates are higher from those external creditors and have gone up significantly over the past number of years. And Plus, they're not able to issue such longer term debt as like the Canadian government, for instance. So essentially, there could be an economic crisis in Panama, is what I'm saying. But what I find it really interesting is that this is a dollarized economy, and it just goes to show how even when you don't have a central bank, you still have people out there who don't really understand the economy. They might want one thing, but they don't understand the consequences of that thing. It's like people want to have their cake and eat it. That's the best way of describing it. And it's not just in Panama. This happens all the time in Canada, the United States, the UK. Everybody wants these amazing government services, but they don't want their taxes to go up. So the government funds it with deficits. That creates consumer price inflation, and they pay that as a tax instead, which is less well known. People want to have their cake and eat it. They're being destroyed either way. There's no free lunches here. You cannot just print money via deficits and have no consequences from doing that. And that's basically what I'm trying to tell you. So even if you had like a gold standard, whatever it is, I'm just here trying to tell you it's never going to work because the masses do not understand the economy. They don't understand how money works. And because of that massive problem, which the government makes sure to keep there, obviously, because they don't really understand how inflation works, they're always begging for these things, but the government might not necessarily be able to afford those things. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Obviously, this is Panama's budget deficits, and you can see that it is really ramped up over the past couple of years. And now, obviously, you've got the impact of lower volumes through the canal. Even though they're getting higher auction prices, that doesn't really offset the massive declines in volumes that we're talking about here. So the amount of money they're getting from that is going down. Plus, they might have to fund a project to put a pipeline in. And then you've got the mining project that was going to bring in significant revenue. And they're not going to get that either unless they actually nationalize the mine and manage to do it that way, which they may well do. I mean, that might actually be in the best interests of Panama. I have no idea. I'm not Panamanian, obviously. And now I'm just going to play you this clip of Chris. He got stuck in one of these protests yesterday. You can just see what's happening. This is the Pan American Highway, and they're just blocking it. You know, at times it's blocked both ways. Apparently you can get by in the middle of the night, but obviously this isn't the case. What you're seeing, what he sent here. So, you know, what's going on in Panama has the ability to cause consumer price inflation, as I outlined in this video, but it also has the ability to cause deflation, depending on what happens in the future. And nobody can really predict what's going to happen, but it's going to be really interesting to see. We've got the government of Canada that could be having an election. You just had the NDP come out and saying that they're going to stand with the Conservatives on getting rid of the carbon pricing for the rest of Canada on all energy sources. And I was going to do that in a separate video. What that's done is that's kind of severed the relationship between them and the Liberals. That could lead to an election. You've got that, and then you've also got the United States having an election next year.
I got them $1.9 trillion relief so far.
So I don't think that spells good things for consumer price inflation. And I mean inflation going up, because governments are going to make promises that they cannot keep and that they cannot make. I mean, even if it's a promise of tax cuts, how are you funding that? Where are you cutting services? You know, people want these great services and they also want tax cuts. Well, the two kind of don't go together. I mean, you can reduce the cost of government, but that's going to take a long time. So what's going to happen in the meantime? And then you've got people basically demanding free money from the government again and more stimulus. And stay tuned to the channel today, guys, because I've got a video coming at 3 o'clock Mountain Time today. So we will continue to monitor this closely at the channel. If you've enjoyed this video, you might like this video here. You might like this video here. And if you're looking for a VPN to get around the censorship laws in Canada, go to expressvpn.com/market